Jingawalla. Welcome to Tales of the Tweed. My name is Arabella and I'm with you every Wednesday morning at 10:30. Tales of the Tweed is a segment about the history of the area, and because we're in the January period and today is January 26, which is known as the Day of Mourning or Day of Survival for me, I'm going to be talking about that and why there's a divergence of opinion about that day. I'll also let you know that this morning I started the day at sunrise at Fingal Head with about 60 local people in the area who stood with First Nations people, and the reason that we call it a day of mourning is because since 1938 Aboriginal people were asking to be included as Australian citizens, and that's the significance of the day for us. And over the years the date has changed due to other political complexities, so I'm going to step that out a bit so you have an understanding. I would also invite any people of the Tweed or anyone that can hear this broadcast to come and sit with us as a First Nations family at Hastings Point Headland at sunset tonight. So that normally is about 5:30 or 5 o'clock. We sit up on the headland, we sit together as a community, we talk about the area in its truthfulness, about the history of the area, but we still want to sit as community together and support each other. So I would welcome anyone of the Tweed who wants to stand with First Nations people on this day to either join us next year at the sunrise ceremony or Hastings Point Headland at the sunset ceremony. Everyone is welcome. As a First Nations woman from a traditional owner family, I welcome you wholeheartedly and with open arms. Last week we spoke about the First Fleet coming in 1788, and we also spoke about Cook coming into Australia in 1770. To be very clear so that people understand the difference in date, Cook came into Botany Bay in April 1770. He didn't remain there, he then mapped to the east coast of Australia. The First Fleet came into Botany Bay in 1788 and in fact came into Botany Bay around the 19th and the 20th of January, so nowhere near January the 26th. And it was a few days later that they found the Teng stream, which is basically a freshwater outlet. Now you can imagine the First Fleet had convicts and a number of other people on board, including Chinese people, which people often don't know about. So it was not a day that it was significant for everybody. What it was is a day that was significant for the British colonial fight for expansion. That was the significance of coming into Australia. It was for a colony of convicts first. They weren't interested in necessarily permanently settling here. That didn't come until much later. But that is why the value around the emotional attachment to January 26 is probably misplaced. It's not a date that Cook came into Australia for the first time. It's a date that a group of people who had incarcerated masses in the bellies of their boats, who had criminalised them, came to talk about their domination, who kind of put a line in the sand and said, we are the dominant group. Britain has decided to take Australia and it's now part of our colony. Now that's a wonderful argument if you're British, but most Australians don't come from that heritage. Most Australians are actually from the bellies of the boats, either convict heritage or other migrants from other areas, and it certainly doesn't embrace or include Aboriginal people. In 1938, they assembled under the banner of the National Aborigines Observance Committee, which is now what we know as NAIDOC, which is celebrated in the June part of every year. And they actually put a protest together petitioning the Australian public to support them in equal citizenship and equality before the law. There was a large group and a protest that was held in Sydney in 1938 at the Town Hall building, and many people supported that. Simultaneously, on the same day, there was a reenactment, which you often see on the ABC every year, of the First Fleet landing, and you see Aboriginal people participating in that reenactment. What you may not know is that Aboriginal people in Sydney did not participate in that reenactment. In fact, people were protesting and outraged that they would want to reenact that day in that manner. So the state at the time decided to go and round up a group of Aboriginal people out near Menindee and Ivanhoe, which is kind of west of New South Wales. They incarcerated and locked them up in the old red Redfern Barracks, which is inside Redfern. There's a large police area that's got sandstone buildings and horses kind of are still there, etc. They were locked up and forced to participate in a reenactment in 1938. So if you can imagine a time in 1938, you've got a posturing of a reenactment with people who are being forced to participate, and then you've got the community at large standing around the Sydney Town Hall and pondering this question of how could we celebrate a nation when we in fact had not yet recognised Aboriginal people at all, and that was not to happen until 1967. So that's an interesting component of the divergence between views from 1788 to 1938. So 150 years in, Aboriginal people put a line in the sand and said, enough, we aren't seen as citizens of the country. We need for that to be readjusted. We needed the government to recognise us as part of our human rights, and we also needed the government to recognise us as Australian citizens. So many people supported the movement in 1938. Many members of the Australian public supported them. So there was certainly a divergence of views. But the First Fleet also had convicts. So there are a number of people that came into the First Fleet that probably weren't really happy to be in Australia, that didn't see it as Britain wanted you to see it, which was them making a claim for the land and an extension of their colony. There was not a National Australia Day at the time, so everyone celebrated at different times. Different states celebrated it throughout the year at different periods of time. It didn't become a national holiday until 1994. So Aboriginal people have always decided for themselves as part of their movement to gain human rights in this nation, their own continent, to claim that that is our day of mourning, to say that this is a day that we are excluded from our own continent. And you can then understand how over the years there's been a variety of different voices, both asking for the date to be changed and those that want to cling to the date but probably not really logically analysing why the date is significant. It's not the date that Cook first came here, that's in April. It's not the date they first came into Botany Bay, that was the 19th and the 20th. It's not the date that it was a national holiday. It is the date that Aboriginal people came together as the National Aborigines Day of Observance Committee, which is now NAIDOC, NAIDOC, and they said, we are here, we are part of Australia, we need to be recognised as citizens, and they have continued to maintain that day. I hope you've enjoyed learning a little bit more about January 26th. That is our last kind of session on that period of time for this month. On the 2nd of February, when I join you again, 10:30 Wednesday morning for Tales of the Tweed, I'm actually going to introduce you to Aboriginal seasons, the 6 seasons of our Aboriginal calendar. That is a local calendar, and I'm going to introduce those dates, the significance of the seasons, and how you might read the landscape to be able to decipher the Aboriginal seasons for yourself. So until next Wednesday at 10:30 on 101.3 FM, Boogle Bear.